just the opposite.
High fly ball, deep left field. Oh, 27 does it again.
God, Fernando Tatis Jr. with a 2-run shot has the Padres on the board. Ball and 2 strikes to Shohei here. Oh, got it! Got it! 33!
Oh, wow. Where did that one go? That's his 11th. Driven out to deep center field. Going back. Springer turning, looking. See ya. Oh, what a shot by Judge. The Yankees lead 1-0.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Free Baseball. I don't know what that weird thing I was doing with my hands was, but welcome back to Free Baseball. We've got a lot to talk about with spring training and a bunch of news as the start of the season draws ever closer. We'll go ahead and start it off with a quick little rundown of the big happenings across spring training. And number one was O'Neal Cruz, the Pirates' top prospect, was optioned to AAA, kind of surprisingly. What are your thoughts about that? I have a couple of my own, but I'd love to hear yours first, Jake.
Welcome back, Free Baseball. Let's go. O'Neal Cruz was sort of killing it this spring. He killed it last September when he made a short call up towards the end of the season, premiered some just incredible max exit velos that sort of caught everybody's eyes. And so a lot of people were expecting, Pirates going to let O'Neal Cruz start the season on the major league club, considering he was such an amazing talent in the minor leagues and considering he had some success when he made his major league debut, and especially with the new CBA promoting prospect call-ups early on in the season, because you get incentives based off a player finishing top 2 in Rookie of the Year voting. So I think what the Pirates are doing here is not trying to take any risks, just trying to be like, hey, if he finishes top 2 in Rookie of the Year, he'll get that service time anyway. And we don't have to risk it if we wait just a few weeks to call him up. But yeah, it doesn't seem like the CBA is keeping teams from not calling up or from manipulating service time. So let's hopefully see O'Neal Cruz come up and just kill it and get that full year of service time when he finally does make his full season debut. But yeah, sort of a little disappointing, but I'm sure he's going to be up really quick because the Pirates could use all the help they can get.
Yeah, I just don't understand this move from the Pirates. From the Pirates standpoint, they really need, honestly, guys that will sell tickets because, why would you go watch the Pirates play other than watching Brian Hayes? And now you have what a lot of people have pegged as probably the front runner for NL Rookie of the Year with O'Neal Cruz. He just destroys balls off the bat. He's one of the exit velocity leaders already. He just crazy talented, 23 years old, soon to be 24, and they're just kind of stashing him for why. I just don't really understand it. Like you said, it'd be really nice to see him finish either first or second in NL Rookie of the Year, just to kind of stick it to the Pirates for trying to manipulate a service time.
Yeah.
I just don't really get it. Moving on to another big piece of news regarding your San Francisco Giants. I know you're wearing the Cubs hat today. Evan Longoria is scheduled to miss 6+ weeks with finger surgery. That came out today. You're probably the expert on all things Giants, so I'd love to hear what you kind of have heard about that and have seen. I haven't been in the loop with Evan Longoria or the Giants.
I don't think I had heard anything previously about this. I know Longoria was dealing with other stuff throughout the offseason, but just recently they said that he was going to get finger surgery. And I think today the news said that he could miss 6+ weeks, which is sort of a big blow considering how well he played last season for the Giants in his limited time, also dealing with injuries last year. It's also a big blow to me. I drafted him in one of my leagues, so I'm going to have to end up dropping him because there's no IL in that league. So that's pretty disappointing. But the Giants are one of those teams that have tons of depth. They're going to be able to cover for him while he's gone. They don't have a lot of right-handed bats, so it's going to be interesting to see how they fill in for him over at third base, and probably a little bit at the DH position was where he was going to be filling in. But yeah, well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's already a big blow to a Giants team that sort of is a sum of all its parts, where if they're missing one of their parts, they might not be as good as they were last year when they won 107 games.
Right. I know they don't really have a whole lot of depth at third baseman. Who does this kind of stick at third? Wilmer Flores for opening day?
Oh yeah, Wilmer is probably going to be the biggest gainer of playing time, but they're probably going to call somebody up from the minors or use one of their depth pieces. They got so many guys. I'm not really sure who benefits the most, but yeah, Wilmer seems like the obvious candidate, considering he's a right-handed bat and can play both corner and field spots, and can play a little DH. But yeah, Wilmer's really good against lefties. Let's hope it's fine. I think one person that I forgot is Tyro Estrada will probably get some good playing time. Maybe Mauricio Dubon doesn't end up getting traded or optioned because he's out of option. So maybe they give him a chance to show what he can do before they probably have to end up sending him away or releasing him.
Right. I think it's like you said, I mean, the Giants are kind of a sum of all of its parts, so they'll make it work somehow. They're really good at that. And moving back a little bit to the prospect sphere regarding Onel Cruz, in the same division, the Cincinnati Reds, who we've kind of lambasted for having kind of a bad offseason, not really understanding their moves, have actually made an exciting move, and they've added Hunter Green to the opening day roster. He's going to make his MLB debut scheduled for April 10th. He is the Cincinnati Reds' top prospect, and we've talked a little bit before about them trading for Bryce Petty and Nick Lodolo in their farm system. Hunter Green is probably going to be the first of a crop of what will be their rotation of the future, and he's electric. I mean, he throws over 100, just wicked stuff. And that's something to be excited about for Reds fans. One of the few things to be excited about for Reds fans this year, but nonetheless, something really nice to look forward to. Yeah,
definitely. He really opened eyes with his spring training debut. I think he threw like well over 50% of his pitches were over 100 miles per hour. He's just showcasing that incredible fastball that he's shown the whole time in the minors. It's hard to remember, but 5 years ago, 2017, he was the number 2 overall pick. I think that was after Royce Lewis went number 1 overall, but he had lots of hype going around him. The Reds had to decide whether or not to make him a hitter or a pitcher, and it looks like they made the right choice making him a pitcher because he is a special talent with that big fastball. Currently, he's the number 22 prospect in the all of baseball, so I'm sure he's about to make a big impact on that team. Not sure it's going to make them competitive, but it's going to make them fun to watch every 5th day.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, it's going to be something to look forward to for a Reds team that's basically just now kicking off a rebuild / retooling. Now they still have a couple of old pieces around that probably won't go anywhere. Like Joey Votto, who we'll talk about in our next segment in the show. Jake, you wrote a nice article for your fantasy baseball, your 2022 fantasy baseball first baseman preview predictions. Let's talk about those a couple. Who are some guys you want to talk about from that list?
Yeah. So if the viewers end up going and checking out the article, you'll see I broke down 5 sort of sections of the first base market, where I had a breakout, a bust, a sleeper, and the best value, and also a tier to target. If you go check that out, you'll see I have rankings for both Roto and Points League, so they can be very helpful for your draft going forward. If you have a big draft coming up this weekend, I know I do. I have my home league draft, which is the biggest one of the year. Everyone's going to be talking about it. Just kidding. Just me and my boys. But yeah, so I'll start out with my breakout choice, and that's Rhys Hoskins, which is sort of a weird one, considering many people sort of thought he broke out in his rookie year, 50-game 2017 debut. He had 18 homers in 50 games, so he was sort of like that Aristides and Aquino, Trevor Story territory, where he just came out of the gate super hot, just mashing dingers all over the place. And now we're in a spot where he's sort of fallen off since then. He hasn't shown the same ceiling that he had previously shown. He sort of fell off from in 2019. He had a career low 112 WRC plus, which isn't too bad, but for his standards, it's not that great. And then he changed his swing heading into 2020, and we started to see that pay some dividends. He showed a career high barrel rate, and then he carried that over into 2021, posting a 17% barrel rate, which was in the 94th percentile, which just shows his incredible power. And even in 2021, he also dealt with injuries, and so that sort of held him back a little from showing what he can do over full season. So now I think if he can carry over those gains that he made in 2020 and carried over into 2021, if he can just stay healthy for a full season this year and show that same ability, he's going to go off. I think he can hit up to 40 home runs, maybe more. He walks at an incredible rate, career 14% walk rate. So he's got all of the makings of somebody who could break out and break into that top tier first baseman. And surprisingly, he's never made an all-star team. And I think this is the year that he finally makes one.
Yeah, I know the ATC projections are a little bit higher on him this year than a couple of the other projections, rising up a little bit. I know his walk rate kind of dropped a little bit from his career average, and they project him to come back up to about 14%, hit 35 home runs, 89 RBI. I mean, he's in a lineup that's a lot deeper than it was previously, where basically it was like the shell of Didi Gregorius, Gene Segura, and Bryce Harper, and now he's got a lot more protection in that lineup. We talked about that a bunch of times with like free agent predictions and review.
Exactly.
And I mean, when you can't really pitch around a big bat like that in the lineup, I mean, he's probably going to produce. I mean, I like Hoskins. I think this is a really good shout from you.
Thank you.
Who is your? I know you had pegged here on our little rundown. Who is your bust pick for this?
Yeah, I have Ty France as my bust pick. It might seem a little controversial considering that he sort of had a breakout 2020 in the COVID shortened season, and backed that up last year with a pretty solid season. He batted .291, 18 homers, and a 129 WRC plus, which is really good. He was pretty impressive. He can play sort of the full right side of the infield, second base, first base, even though he came up as like a third baseman. But there's lots of underlying metrics that sort of make me want to stay away from him going into 2022. He really doesn't hit the ball that hard. He has a 6.8% barrel rate. And if you remember, I just said that Hoskins was up at 17%. So if that doesn't tell you enough, 6.8% is a little bit below average, sort of well below average, 33rd percentile. That's not that great. And he doesn't hit the ball in the air a lot. He's a big ground ball guy. He only had a 21% StatCast measured fly ball rate last year. And that doesn't really bode well for his power sticking next year. Additionally, he does have a really good contact bat. He has an above average contact rate. I think it's around 83%, a low strikeout rate, 16%, which is really appealing. But he calls T-Mobile Park home, which is one of the surprisingly, it's one of the biggest BABIP reducing parks. It sort of keeps balls in play, keeps them in the yard, keeps them in players' gloves. So it's sort of hard to predict France to bat near 300 like he did last year. I know he dealt with some injuries mid-season, so I don't know. I think just too many underlying StatCast metrics and stuff that point to him not being able to continue what he did last year. And that sort of has me avoiding him, which is fine. Like, you can't really lose a fantasy draft if you avoid a player, if you don't draft a player. Like last year, I'm sure there were so many people not avoiding Vlad Jr., but not sort of taking him super high like many people were expecting a massive breakout. The massive breakout came, and the people that didn't draft him didn't lose their leagues because of it. I know my little brother drafted Vlad Jr. in our home league last year, and that was sort of upsetting because he was the best player in fantasy. But I still won the league. So it worked out well. But yeah, Ty France is someone I'm avoiding. I wouldn't say he's completely off my draft board. I'm just not going to be taking him as high as he's going in ADP.
Yeah, a little shot to Jake's brother. You know, got to remind him who won the league.
Yes, sir.
I know Ty France is his ATC projections too. I mean, we talk about that a lot. Don't really favor him as well as they have previously. Favor him kind of drop down a little bit. RBIs one less, and then about 13 less runs. Similar walk rate, a little bit higher strikeout percentage. And I just honestly think, I mean, if you talk about like a breakout guy that you had with Rhys Hoskins, I think you just kind of get the same thing with like France. Well, not the same thing with France, but like, I mean, based on projections right now, it looks like, I mean, he has the same season, if not a little worse. And I don't really understand why you would really want to settle for minimal upside is what it seems like he would provide.
Exactly.
Unlike our next guy that we're going to have you talk about, who is the best player in all of baseball. Why don't you talk about my man, Frank Swindell?
We got the hats for this one. We're looking like a Cubs podcast. Yeah, and Frank Swindell, Frank the Tank. Frankie
Swindell
2 hits.
Owns your team.
Schwindy City.
Schwindy City. I love Frank Swindell. I would love to hear what you have to say about him.
Yeah, he's I wrote about him in another article too when I was discussing last season's offensive breakouts, and I sort of have the same sentiment here. It's just because he's going so late. I think post pick 200 in NFBC drafts, he just brings sort of one of those unique skill sets that you don't really see from many players. He's got he had a super low strikeout rate last year and paired that with a really high max exit velo, which is a good measure of a player's raw power, which usually translates into game power. Last year, he batted .326 with 14 dingers and a 152 WRC plus in a short sample for the Cubs after he got traded over from the A's. And he didn't really. I don't think he's going to produce at that level going forward, but even if he performs at a fraction of that level, he's going to be really good. I think he could bat 270 plus, 20 plus home runs, which is really solid. You don't really find that sort of ability late in drafts. And considering he's got the upside that he showed last year, where he can bat over 300, he can hit upwards of 30 bombs if he's really keeps everything going. He's just a really good late draft pick. The only thing to worry about is that he was a super late debut guy, he was, I think, 28, 29 when he made his debut, which is sort of old for a rookie. But I really believe in Swindell, especially in points leagues. If he keeps that strikeout rate down like he did, that's just super valuable in a points league where you're getting minus points for strikeouts, and he keeps the strikeouts down while still maintaining big power, which is hard to find in a draft that late. So yeah, Frank Swindell is my sleeper pick because he is being slept on.
Yeah, I'm a little biased, obviously, as you can tell by the Cubs hat. Same as on your head. I mean, I love the Cubs. Frank Swindell, he was like the feel-good story, along with Patrick Wisdom a little bit and Rafael Ortega, with this team full of old rookies and journeymen. Frank Swindell, he just puts the bat on the ball. He doesn't play a very good first base defensively, which you don't really need to worry about too much in fantasy unless you have kind of like weird scoring. But I mean, he's, like you said, I mean, I think he has a lot of upside. He doesn't strike out a lot, puts the ball in play, and he hits it hard. The issue with Chicago is it might blow back a couple of home runs into play, but he has a lot of power to the pull side. He's a right-handed hitter, obviously, and that's the shorter porch at Wrigley Field. So, I mean, he has potential, kind of like Patrick Wisdom, especially now flanked with Seiya Suzuki. I mean, they have a trio of right-handed hitters that could be really dangerous, and I think Frank Swindell could be a big part of that. We'll keep it moving, and we'll talk about your value pick of the article.
Yeah, so with my value pick, it's sort of just picking somebody out of the ADP or average draft position that I think is going sort of a little bit too late, not sort of the same as a sleeper where it's like they're going super late in the draft where you're getting a guy that has super high upside, but sort of somebody that I'm just a little bit higher on that I think is providing good value where they're going, is sort of like a safe pick. And I think that's Joey Votto. I think the reason he's going so late is because of his age. He's going to be, I think, 38 next year. He's going to be 38 next year, but last year he made a huge change to his profile that we started to see in 2020, because in 2018 as a 34-year-old he hit just 12 dingers across a full season, which was just like, oh man, like Votto used to be a 30 plus home run guy. Like, is he really falling off? Is his career really starting to dwindle down sort of in his mid 30s? And he sort of realized, like, I'm going to have to make a change if I want to continue being an effective major leaguer. And he did that in 2020. He sort of took away some of that ability to avoid strikeouts and paired it with increased power. And we barely just started seeing that in the COVID shortened season. And then in 2021, he just went off. And it's all seen in his StatCast metrics. He had a increased barrel rate over 17%. And that was 95th percentile, same as Rhys Hoskins. He had a 96th 96th percentile, 53% hard hit rate. And then he got that expected slugging, which is a result of those two numbers, all the way up to 592, which is incredible. That was in the 97th percentile. So he's in the top 3% of all players in expected slugging percentage. And that helped him hit 36 home runs and a 140 WRC plus, which is his best mark since 2017, which was that year prior to him hitting 12 homers. So I think obviously he made clear changes to his approach that led to a massive power breakout. And if he just carries that over into 2022, it's not like he has to he doesn't have to make a change. He doesn't have to add anything to his game. If he just continues crushing the ball like he did last year, he's going to be incredible, especially because he was injured for part of last season. He played a very small amount of games for somebody that hit 36 home runs. I think he was third in home run to fly ball rate behind Fernando Tatis and I think Vlad Jr. Yeah, he was incredible last year, and I think he's going to continue it next year despite his age.
Yeah. Looking quickly at like Baseball Savant, I mean, Joey Votto just seems like he doesn't age. I mean, his max exit velocity in his entire career actually came last season. He was 38 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just incredible. I mean, you've seen the memes everywhere. I mean, Joey Votto still bangs. He's
exactly
like he's just going to be really good. And we'll talk a little bit about that more. And you have him in this different tier guys and your tier 2 guys in your article that you can read at theathleteshub.org. And I just think, like you said, I mean, the value that he provides, I mean, potentially slipping because he's old. I mean, he had an amazing season last year.
Yeah.
Like it was just otherworldly, especially for a player, a 38-year-old first baseman. He hit 36 home runs and was just really good. I like this pick too. I think you're right on the money here. So why don't you go ahead and break down your tier to target, which is tier 2. I'll rattle off a couple of the guys that you have for points rankings really quick, and then we can go over the Roto rankings too. So in your tier 2, you had Jose Abreu, Josh Bell, Rhys Hoskins, like you mentioned, Joey Votto, Jake Cronenworth, Anthony Rizzo, and CJ Cron. What do you think of those guys, and why is this your tier to target?
Yeah, this is my tier to target because it allows you to wait on first base while covering those positions that sort of are a little lighter later in the draft. So like third base falls off really quickly because there aren't too many guys that you can really rely on. Lots of guys that dealt with injuries last year, lots of young guys that are unproven, lots of guys like Matt Chapman that we talked about who sort of fell off last year, and you're not really guaranteed a bounce back even if you're expecting it. So I like that tier 2 because you can go early and draft those guaranteed strong players in other positions in the top 100. And then you wait until after pick 100 and you can get guys like Hoskins and Votto and Bell and Rizzo that will be able to provide sort of similar value to those guys in tier 1. Obviously, nobody's going to be keeping up with Vlad Jr. and Freddie Freeman, but these guys all have the ability to hit 250 with 30 plus home runs, which is really solid, especially in Roto. A lot of these guys in points leagues have really good either low strikeout rates or high walk rates. Hoskins for the high walk rate, Cronenworth for the low strikeout rate. So I think there's just so many good opportunities to gain significant value at draft position here after pick 100. So I think it's important to wait just a little bit after pick 100 to grab that starting first baseman rather than reaching or spending draft capital early on guys like Goldie and Olsen and Alonso that you can get sort of similar value later while also filling out like your starters and your closers and your third baseman early on in the draft.
Yeah, and I know you talked about your Roto rankings, and it's similar but a little bit different positioning with one new name in there. And it's Jose Abreu, Rhys Hoskins, Josh Bell, CJ Cron, Joey Votto, and Jared Walsh. Why the include for Jared Walsh over someone like Cronenworth or Rizzo in the Roto rankings?
I don't think it's more of an inclusion of Jared Walsh, but more of a declusion of Jared Walsh from points leagues. He strikes out too much. He doesn't walk a lot. The reason he's so low in my first base rankings for Roto, if you look at ADP, he's going off, I think, as the 7th or 8th first baseman. I have him down at 11, and that's because he's got massive struggles against lefties. Last year, I think he batted below 200. He showed power against lefties, but he obviously struggled a little to make contact. So I don't know if that's going to continue into next year, but it's sort of hard to bank on him being the full-time first baseman when it's so obvious that you can platoon him super easily with somebody who crushes lefties. Maybe I think they have Phil Gosselin still on the team. I'm not, maybe he signed with somebody else, but they definitely have a righty bat that could fill in at first base for Walsh, and sort of spell him against tough lefties, which sort of limits his upside of not only playing time, but showing the ability to crush lefties that he didn't have last year.
Okay, so that's an interesting thought to think about for your rankings. And like I said earlier, you can read Jake's rankings, and he's done these for the top 50 starting pitchers and also for catchers this year. And you can read that at theathleteshub.org. And really quickly, we're going to move on to the crux of our show today, and that's going to be the off-season's winners and losers.
Yes,
we're going to start off here. We're going to start off here with our winners, and number one, first and foremost, we're going to talk about the New York Mets. Obviously, I mean, I personally think they had the best offseason. They signed Starling Marte, Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha, Max Scherzer, Adam Ottavino. And the ones they lost to free agency were Noah Syndergaard, Aaron Loup, Javier Baez, Marcus Stroman, Rich Hill, Brad Hand, Jeurys Familia, Jonathan Villar, and Michael Conforto. But there's always a chance that Michael Conforto could come back. He's still a free agent. They also, through trade, added a Bay Area guy, breaking Jake Crumpler's heart, Chris Bassett. Why don't you talk about some of the Mets moves and which ones do you think are the most impactful and why you think they had the best offseason?
I think there's one obvious, most impactful one, and that was the signing of Max Scherzer to the highest average annual value of all time. I think it was over 40 million, which is that's insane. Some people don't even get that for a full contract, or some people don't even make that in their entire careers. So that's crazy that he's going to get that in his first year in New York. But he makes with Jacob deGrom makes probably one of the scariest 1-2 punches of all time. Like just having deGrom, who is probably the most dominant pitcher in baseball right now, and adding a surefire Hall of Famer and Scherzer as your number 2 makes that rotation absolutely insane. And if they make the playoffs, like that's going to be an easy like game 1, game 2 win. Like you're winning both of those 2 games if both of those guys go into the season healthy. So I think Scherzer is definitely the most impact acquisition, and to add Bassett through trade through that too gives them a lot of depth in the rotation if they deal with any injuries going forward. Other than that, I think they needed to add the other guys that you mentioned, Marte, Escobar, Canha, and Ottavino, because they lost so many guys in free agency so far. I don't think Syndergaard's a big loss, but Loup was really good last year. Baez obviously is one of the premier defenders and has some power in his bat, and losing guys like Stroman and Hill sort of reduces the depth in the rotation. So they really needed to make sure to continue to add, and they spent a lot of money this offseason, and I think have a top 3 payroll in the MLB now.
Yeah, I liked a lot of the moves, and especially, I mean, you talked about the Scherzer move. I think the Chris Bassett move was also a major coup for, I believe their GM is Sandy Alderson. Major coup for them. I think they have probably, I mean, you could argue maybe have the best rotation in baseball. I think top to bottom, when you can start, basically, I think their number 5 starter is probably going to be Taijuan Walker. Maybe Carlos Carrasco if he comes back. I mean, if that's a really, really good starting 5, top to bottom. Ottavino signing with them too to bolster that bullpen. I know they lost Hand, who wasn't a big loss. I mean, he was kind of bad in New York, but like you said, Aaron Loup was really good, and Aaron Loup's been quietly very good for the last few years. And then getting another Bay Area guy like Chris Bassett, Mark Canha. I mean, Mark Canha is one of the most underrated bats in baseball. Ton of power. Replaces Conforto, who kind of fell off a little bit last year, and they could still re-sign him. I mean, like I said, he's a free agent. I don't think they will, but getting Marte, basically their big losses to me look like, I mean, Stroman and maybe Conforto. Loup is kind of a loss, but I mean, he's a reliever. They can only affect your team but so much. Yeah. And I think they have more than enough in their bullpen to really replace some of the production that he had. I just think, top to bottom, that lineup looks really strong. Adding Eduardo Escobar is another really big add there too. A little switch hitting bat to go with Francisco Lindor. I like their lineup. Especially with the DH now. I mean, you can cram Tom Smith in there, fit him somewhere in the lineup, and that lineup just looks scary. to compete in the NL East, with the World Series champion Atlanta Braves. Moving on to another winner, we're going to talk about the Minnesota Twins, who up until the last week or so, I probably would not have had in the winners category if not for their signing of one Carlos Correa.
Yeah.
They didn't make too many moves directly in free agency. I mean, they signed Byron Buxton to an extension, Dylan Bundy, Carlos Correa, and Joe Smith. Carlos Correa obviously being the biggest one there. They didn't really lose much of anything to free agency. They lost Andrelton Simmons, who was a net negative bat last year. Alex Colomé, decent reliever. Michael Pineda, starter. They traded for Sonny Gray from the Cincinnati Reds for Bryce Petty, like we said earlier, with Hunter Green. Gary Sanchez and Gio Urshela were traded for Josh Donaldson and Isaiah Carner-Falefa, and they also traded away Mitch Garver and Ben Rortvet, two catching options there. I think this was a good offseason for them. I don't think it was as good as it could have been. I don't think they still have the starting pitching to really compete to win a championship, but it's nice to see them compete for the playoffs, and they could surprise me. I mean, they've looked pretty good in spring training, and are projected to get a lot more play from their young starting rotation at the back end to back up Sonny Gray. What are your thoughts on these moves?
They sort of surprised everyone, I think, with that Carlos Correa move. Like, it was sort of looking really confusing what they were doing with their offseason, trading for Isaiah Carner-Falefa and then trading him away and trading away Josh Donaldson and everybody. But it was just to clear up the cap space to sign Carlos Correa to a record-breaking contract for AAV for an infielder. Pretty crazy. Correa's a special talent. Especially if you're considering his defense. So the Twins did that. I think it's important to note that I forgot to add the Chris Archer signing from,
right.
I think that was yesterday.
That.
Yeah. So they did add a little bit to the rotation more with Bundy and Sonny Gray already. So they have those veterans in there. It's really hard to count on Archer doing anything, especially since he's really fallen off the last few years. Ever since he got traded away from the Rays, seemed like the Rays knew what they were doing in that one of the worst trades of all time to the Pirates. But yeah, they made some crazy moves. I think it gives some hope to Byron Buxton that they extended him. Hopefully he can stay healthy. I know he's got a lot of incentives for staying healthy and performing well. Dylan Bundy, Carlos Correa, obviously already said those guys. But yeah, just to get Gary Sanchez as well at catcher and Urshela to fill in on the left side of the infield. They added to a lineup that was already really good and improved their pitching just a little bit, just enough to make them a winner in our eyes for this offseason.
Right. And I know if you've been keeping up with their spring training, they've actually looked really good in spring training. They've had a couple guys get featured actually on Pitching Ninja. Joan Duran has looked really, really strong. So, I mean, I think the Archer signing is a little understated because, I mean, he's Chris Archer. He's sucked the last few years. Sorry, Chris Archer, if you're watching. I know you're probably not, but that's okay.
Also, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the podcast.
If you're watching.
So, I mean, Chris Archer, I think if someone like a Joan Duran, if he's not in the rotation to start, Chris Archer, could fill that void and kind of be an innings eater for someone like Bailey Ober, Joan Duran, any of these younger pitchers that are expected to fill out the back of the back end of the rotation. I think he's supposed to be like an insurance policy. I mean, if he doesn't work out, they can just DFA him. He's not really on a contract worth any major money. Maybe push him to the bullpen. Maybe hope his just comes back to what it used to be. I think the Twins offseason was really good. And especially now, they could compete for their division. I don't think the White Sox are all that strong, or as strong as people think they are in that division. The Guardians aren't really much of anything. The Royals are rebuilding. The Tigers are up and coming, but I don't think they're quite there yet. I like the moves the Twins have made. They basically just shifted on Donaldson and replaced him with Carlos Correa, really. Gio Urshela. So, I mean, I'd take that trade any day of the week.
Yeah, it's a pretty good replacement.
I'm sure Yankees fans would love to as well. It's a little bit too bad. Let's talk about another winner here, and probably for my money, if the Mets had the best offseason in baseball, I think this team had the 1B to that, and I think it's the Toronto Blue Jays. The Toronto Blue Jays signed Jose Barrios, Barrios to an extension, signed Kevin Gossman, signed Yimi Garcia, and Yusei Kikuchi. They lost to free agency Steven Matz. Marcus Simeon's a big loss. Kirby Yates, not so much. Robbie Ray, AL Cy Young winner. Corey Dickerson, but they traded a huge blockbuster trade for Matt Chapman and a not so much a blockbuster trade for Raimel Tapia. I really like the moves that they've made in this window, and to me, they're the best team in the AL East, potentially the best team in the AL. I couldn't be even happier with the Blue Jays offseason, especially if I'm a Blue Jays fan. What are your thoughts on their moves? We've talked about them a million times, but I'd love to hear them again.
I totally agree. The Blue Jays are looking like the team to beat in the MLB, especially in the AL East, the loaded AL East. The Blue Jays are looking like a powerhouse now, with the breakout of Vlad Jr. and the continued ascension of Bo Bichette and George Springer being on the team for a full season, hopefully healthy full season this year. They can be really incredible, especially now that they have Barrios, who they traded for last offseason or last trade deadline, and then extended him over the offseason, which is huge to keep him around. And then to pair him with Gausman, who was just so good for the Giants last year. Even though I'm not super high on him continuing at that level next year, I think he's still going to be more than serviceable. Like they just have two aces up at the top of the rotation, which is really going to help them out, especially because they have such like a young team, and to add other guys around them, like veteran like Matt Chapman is super interesting because they really needed the defense. Especially on the left side of the infield. Bo Bichette's not the greatest defender over at shortstop, and they don't really have too much defense, but adding the best defensive third baseman in the game will obviously help that. And if he can bounce back on the offensive side, that's Chapman. If he can bounce back offensively, he will really just make that lineup, like that was already one of the scariest last year, into just even more dangerous. Obviously they lost Semien, but Chapman will do his best to replace him. And they lost Robbie Ray, like you said, AL Cy Young Award winner, but Gausman was way up there in the NL Cy Young voting as well. So that's a really good replacement. And I think the underrated signing here is the Yusei Kikuchi signing, which gives them not only upside towards the back end of the rotation, but also gives them stability, since Kikuchi is a guy that can eat innings. Even if he doesn't take a step forward, he's still going to be really solid at the back end of the bullpen. And to have a guy like Kikuchi, who I'm pretty sure made the All-Star team last year for his incredible first half, to have that guy as your number 5, like that's so good. That's really incredible, especially for a team that seems to be like, you want to say that the Blue Jays are most notable for their incredible lineup, and now to have a top 5, top 3 rotation in all of baseball, that just makes that team really incredible. And they really didn't lose that much this offseason, other than those guys that they lost to free agency, but to trade for Chapman and Tapia and to just lose Gunnar Hoagland, Kevin Smith, and Randall Grichuk is really not too bad, especially because those guys were probably not going to contribute too much on a team that has a ton of guys already contributing at a super high level.
Right, and I totally agree with you. I just don't think they lost much of anything outside of like Marcus Semien. Steven Matz, I mean, he signed with the Cardinals, but is that really like a signing that you look at and it's like, oh yeah, that puts them over the top? To me, not really. Robbie Ray's kind of a big loss. Kirby Yates, not so much. I don't think either. They made some good moves. I mean, signing Barrios to an extension. Gausman, even if he doesn't quite replicate his form from last year, I mean, he's still a solid pitcher. Kikuchi, same thing. Raimel Tapia to me, I mean, I don't think he's a wild card, but I think, I mean, when you shift Randall Grichuk's contract and then get back Raimel Tapia, who looks like he could be a very quality fourth outfielder. I mean, he shrunk his strikeout rate last year. The biggest problem with Tapia, I mean, and in terms of being a fourth outfielder for this team, is he hits the ball on the ground too much. That was Vlad's problem, and they fixed that. So whatever hitting coach they have obviously knows what he's doing. Sure. So I mean, Raimel Tapia, I mean, I like him. I don't think he sets the world on fire, but they've made moves at all ends. I mean, Matt Chapman completely bolsters the lineup. Excellent third baseman. They get Gausman, who's potentially another ace to add to that incredible rotation. And then you get guys that really kind of steady the ship. Yimi Garcia is a really solid reliever. Yusei Kikuchi, like you said, is a back into the rotation innings eater at worst. That's what he's going to be. At very worst, I mean, they can just throw him in the bullpen. He'll be a swing man. They can call him Nate Pearson, or Nate Pearson will go to the bullpen. They still have a loaded farm system after trading for for Matt Chapman, and they just made moves that you look at and you're like, well, okay, well, yeah, that guy's pretty good. I like this offseason a lot for Toronto. Didn't really lose much of anything in my eyes outside of Simeon and Robbie Ray. I think they had a great offseason.
Yeah, they were my World Series favorites before the lockout ended, and then they went and added Chapman and Kikuchi and other guys. So if I already had them at the top tier of all baseball teams, and then they added even more, like I don't know, they're just going to be impossible to stop.
I completely agree. In our way too early predictions article, I actually had them winning the World Series, I think.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm over the moon with the Blue Jays and potentially being right.
I guess we got to move to Canada.
Oh yeah. We're Jays fans now. We the North. We'll talk about your actual team. We'll talk about the San Francisco Giants. We have them pegged as another winner, big winner this offseason. They made some really more under the radar moves that just the more you look at them, kind of the same with some of the Blue Jays moves, just look so good. I mean, I believe they re-signed Anthony DeSclafani. They signed Alex Cobb, Alex Wood, Carlos Rodon, Jake Junis, signed Jock Peterson, Matt Boyd. They lost to free agency Jose Quintana, not much of anything. Kevin Gausman, like we said previously, Chris Bryant, Alex Dickerson, Donovan Solano, and Johnny Cueto, who could still re-sign. He has not yet signed and not made any big trades. You're our resident Giants fan. I would love to hear your thoughts about your favorite team.
They sort of went off this offseason. Before the lockout began, they made sure to re-sign their rotation mates that sort of defined the team last year. DeSclafani is super underrated. Tony Disco. He was really underrated last year. If you take out his starts from Coors and against the Dodgers, which are some of the toughest matchups in all of baseball. Obviously, Coors just has that thin air, and the Dodgers have one of the scariest lineups in baseball. DeSclafani was like a top 20 starting pitcher in all of baseball if you take out those starts. Obviously, you can't do that. He's going to have to face the Dodgers next year. He's going to have to pitch in Coors, but he is really effective. And I think really underrated. And then to keep Alex Wood, who dealt with some injuries last year, but was still really effective, just makes that rotation very solid, especially with Logan Webb, a youngster leading that rotation. And then the last move that they made before the lockout was signing Alex Cobb, which is really interesting because Cobb has had up and downs in his career. He dealt with injuries last year, but going to a team that has excelled at getting the most out of veteran starting pitchers, like we've seen with DeSclafani last year and Wood last year and Gausman and Drew Smyly in 2020. Cobb could be the breakout guy this year. I tweeted the other day that he's my dark horse NL Cy Young candidate. And that's not even just a homer take. That's just me thinking that the Giants get the most out of their guys. And Cobb was really solid last year. He increased his velo. He's got an incredible splitter that they call the Thing. So if you got a pitch that has a nickname for it, then I think it's pretty good. But yeah, Cobb could be really good. So that was already 3 guys that they added to their rotation prior to the lockout. And then they came back and they were like, how about we sign the best starting pitcher still available? And that's Carlos Rodon, who we were both very low on in our remaining free agents draft that we did a few weeks ago. Neither of us took him. And the Giants are probably about to make us look stupid. Like I said, they're so good at getting the most out of their pitchers. And Rodon was incredible last year, finishing top 10, top 5 in AL Cy Young Award voting last year. He was really good. If he can just maintain the velo that made him incredible last year, pumping that fastball up towards 98, 100 miles per hour, the Giants are going to have a really tough rotation to beat, especially with the depth pieces that you mentioned, Jake Junis and Matt Boyd. They could, once again, just get something crazy out of them. The last signing that I'll talk about is the Peterson signing, Jock Peterson, Mr. Pearls. He's a 2-time World Series champion. I'm glad that he stopped in Atlanta and Chicago before going to the Giants, so he doesn't go straight from the Dodgers to the Giants. It makes it hard for me to root for him. But yeah, I'll be rooting big time for him. He's a guy that struggles big time against left-handed pitchers, so I think he's obviously going to be platooned. He can play a little first base. He can play a little outfield. He's probably going to get a lot of time at DH, but I think Peterson can provide a lot of power to that lineup. Probably see a few balls landing into the bay over in the right field wall, and that should be fun to watch. And like you said, they didn't lose too many guys. Like Gausman's a big one to lose, but like I said, they added five starting pitchers to replace him, so that's okay. And KB, Chris Bryant, was not too great with the Giants last year down the stretch. Even though he helped them make the playoffs and played all over the field, his bat was sort of fell off in his first games outside of Chicago. And they didn't really lose any major pieces other than that. So I think the Giants really did a good job of keeping the cost of their team down, which is not something that us as fans should care about, but it sort of keeps them open to make some additions mid-season like they did last year, getting Chris Bryant, etc. So, I mean, I think the Giants are primed for another really good season, and I think they're going to surprise many again like they did last year, winning 107 games.
Right. And I like the moves they made, especially like you mentioned, keeping the cost down, potentially setting them up for making a run next year in free agency to try to get a big bat to help their lineup a little bit more. I think the big get, like you said, I mean, other than re-signing Tony Disco, Alex Cobb was unreal last year. I mean, he upped his K rate, Ks per nine, highest of his entire career. He had 3.76 ERA with a 2.92 FIP in Angel Stadium, and for whatever reason, I mean, if you do well there, I don't understand how, because that stadium's obviously cursed towards starting pitchers not named Shohei Ohtani.
True.
So like I think you're completely right with the Giants' take on Alex Cobb. I mean, it's a guy that already looked like he was figuring something out. I mean, he'd struggled a few years previously, and now he's going to go to the Giants, who just have some sort of new Cardinals devil magic that turn whatever player into an all-star. And I just think he could be really good for that team. I mean, he's obviously, like you said, I mean, he gets a lot of ground balls, strands runners, just doesn't give up a lot of hard contact. I love all the moves that the Giants made. Jock might not be like the biggest addition to a lineup, but the Giants love to platoon. There's a good chance they could have a right-handed bat, platoon him against right-handed pitching. He'll smash a couple baseballs into the bay, and that'll be a season. And if that's what they get out of him, that's probably worth what they're paying. They're not paying him very much. A lot of really strong under the radar moves made by the Giants, who could still add at the deadline, could still be in play. Maybe for Michael Conforto, probably not. I mean, they're run really well. I don't think they'd want to give up, a draft pick for a bat like that, but never know. I like the moves they made, and that's why we have them as a winner. We'll move on, unfortunately, womp womp, to the losers, and we're going to start with the aforementioned Cincinnati Reds. Cincinnati Reds, we have as losers. I mean, they signed Donovan Solano away from the Giants, Tommy Pham, Colin Moran away from the Pirates. They lost to free agency. They waived Wade Miley. He was claimed by the Cubs. They lost Michael Lorenzen, Michael Givens, and Nick Castellanos. They obviously traded away Sonny Gray. They traded away Jesse Winker, Eugenio Suarez, and Amir Garrett, a big part of their team from the few years previously. Acquired Chase Petty, Jake Fraley, Brandon Williamson, and Mike Minor. We already talked about why the Mike Minor trade made absolutely zero sense.
Yeah.
I am not high, even with Hunter Green. I am not high in Cincinnati Reds. They are obviously, if you were to grade them for their offseason, you'd either give them an F or you'd give them an R for rebuild. And it's very blatant. It's very blatant. They traded away any of their good players, not named Joey Votto. I just don't. I don't know. If I was a Reds fan previously before the Hunter Green news, I would be kind of annoyed. I mean, this is a team that made the playoffs last year. They made sure if they made the playoffs last year, but I think they made. No,
they were close. They were close last year. They made it in 20.
They made it in 20. I'm pretty sure they were close. They were close in 19. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you take a team that's on the doorstep potentially of being a playoff team, and in the last few years, you just watch them. Oh well, nah, we don't really want to. We don't want to compete. They have one of the cheapest owners in baseball, and it's an annoying time to be a Reds fan, because you're in that transitional phase, watching, this is our good team. We're going to throw that away. Now you got to watch Joey Votto hit 40 home runs for a team that's going to win like 70 games, and that's all you got. Maybe watch a couple of your young guys. What are your thoughts on the Reds offseason?
I totally agree with you. They sort of nosedived after they looked like they were on the rise. I'm sure some of it has to do with like they peaked in 2020 when there were no fans, so they didn't really get a lot of revenue from that season when they were at their peak, and so that probably affected them going forward. But to have just like a 3-year competitive window is sort of weird, and the fact that they didn't fully sell off is sort of like, what are you doing? Like, you can't toe the line, you can't do sort of what like the Rockies do, where they don't really know what they're doing. Are they competing? Are they selling everybody off?
There's a reason the Rockies have been bad forever, and that's exactly why. I mean, they still have Luis Castillo, they still have Votto. I don't expect them to trade Votto. That's probably a non-starter. But like, I just don't get some moves they've made. I mean, they let Castellanos go. I think he had an opt-out.
Yeah, he did.
And to even give him the opt-out now kind of shows like, oh well, we don't really expect to, if we're not competing, just go. We don't care. I don't know. I'd be pissed off if I was a Reds fan.
Yeah, it's tough to see guys like Winker and Suarez go, who have been such a big part of the team over the last 3 years, and just, some of the trades just like didn't make any sense. Like you said, the Amir Garrett trade like just is brainless. Like, I don't understand what they were doing other than like trying to get a guy out of the system that they thought maybe was like a bad fit, like personality wise, which is always a weird move, especially to get a guy like Mike Minor back, who is already going to miss the start of the season with an injury, has a large contract. Like, it just doesn't make much sense. They got a couple good prospects back in Petty and Williamson, but they lost guys in free agency. They lost like the heart of their lineup. I know they've still got Jonathan India in tow, who was the National League Rookie of the Year last year, and you said Joey Votto's name a couple times, and they still got Molly and Castillo in town, so like they could still be pretty competitive. But I think for a lot of those guys, it's just going to be, let's show how good they are for the first half of the season, and then finish off the full trade off at the deadline. So I'm it's definitely a loss for this offseason for what they were doing, because like, if they had just made a couple additions and maybe got Castellanos back, like they could have definitely competed. But they decided, you know what, like, I don't see it this year, so let's toe the line and see what happens during the first half, and then probably trade everybody off once we inevitably suck.
Right. And I completely agree with you. I mean, I didn't understand a lot of the trades. We talked about it several times. I mean, Chase Petty and Brandon Williamson are pretty good gets. But I mean, you mentioned Jake Fraley. Jake Fraley was part of the Mariners trade, and you said Jake Fraley, you thought his ceiling was basically Jesse Winker. Like, and I kind of agree with that. And they basically get him as like what could potentially be, he's probably not a centerpiece, but I mean, he's a big part of that trade. Getting 2 pitching prospects and then Jake Fraley and Mike Minor, it doesn't move the needle for me at all. Even if they're going to if they're towing the line for this rebuild, that doesn't make sense. If they're going to sell all of it off, I mean, why didn't you sell all of it off and sell Castillo or trade Castillo to like the Yankees and actually get someone good? I don't know. I don't really understand it. Like you said, it's kind of like a Rockies towing the line off season. And like I said previously, I mean, the Rockies have not been good for a long time.
You do not want to be compared to the Rockies.
No one, no baseball team should ever go out and attempt to be compared to the Rockies at anything. And sticking with the trend of painful rebuilds, we're going to talk about the Oakland Athletics. The Oakland Athletics obviously sold off Chris Bassett, Matt Olson, and Matt Chapman. But that's okay, because they signed Eric Thames, Stephen Vogt, and Jed Lowry. In free agency, they lost Starling Marte, who was a rental, Mark Canha. They lost Yan Gomes, who was also a rental last year, Josh Harrison, Andrew Chafin, and Sergio Romo. So, I mean, Canha and Marte are kind of big losses, but the other guys, I mean, they were on 1 year's, more role players. They traded for Brent Honeywell, JT Ginn, Christian Pache, Shea Langoliers, Gunnar Hoagland, Kevin Smith, and Jake Diekman. And I don't know. Their offseason was weird. They sold everybody, and they are very, very obvious about it. But this is a team that was a playoff contender, like a heavy playoff contender, with guys still under several years of control. That they're like, nah, I don't want that anymore. Even more egregious than the Reds rebuild, in my opinion. You love the Athletics too, along with your Giants. What were your thoughts, like, when you saw this start to happen? Was the writing on the wall, or was this kind of a shock, and then it's just like sinking more, seeing them trade everyone away?
The writing is always on the wall with the A's to begin a rebuild. They're one of those teams that keep a low payroll all the time. They are always on the verge of trading away their stars. We've seen this just a few years ago when they traded away Donaldson and others. I think that was 2014, 2015. I think it was 14. But yeah, they run a low payroll. They are one of those low revenue teams, small market. I'm putting air quotes for people listening audio only, but they're just a team that is always looking for discounts and is always living on the edge. So because their owner isn't giving enough money to the GM to make a lot of moves, to sign a lot of big free agents, they're trying to make as much profit as possible by keeping the payroll low. They always have to be looking ahead to free agencies in the future to get the most out of the players that they have. So like you were saying, Matt Olson, Matt Chapman, Chris Bassett, all gone. I think Bassett was going to be a free agent after this year. So obviously that one makes a little bit of sense, but Matt Olson and Chapman both, I think, had 2 more years remaining on their contracts. But you have to get the most out of them while you can. The A's saw their window of competition dwindling. And so while you still have those guys in control, you sort of have to trade them away to get prospects in return rather than just losing them in free agency, because the A's know they can't compete with the Yankees, they can't compete with the Braves and the Dodgers of signing these big guys once they hit free agency. So they got to get something. It's better to get a few prospects that you like, that you get to pick out, rather than getting one pick from a qualifying offer. So it makes sense from that perspective, but this is all a result of the A's owner being a cheap person and not giving the president of baseball operations, Billy Beane, and the GM the leeway to make a lot of moves. So yeah, it's really disappointing to see those guys go. They're always fan favorites, but as somebody who's from the Bay Area, who's been to a lot of A's games, who's watched a lot of A's games, you always know that's going to happen. You know that they're never going to keep somebody in town. I think the biggest contract they ever gave out was to Eric Chavez, and that was in the early 2000s. So that was a really long time ago, nearing 20 years ago. So the fact that they are still in that same boat has to do with their owner being cheap and not giving enough money for the GM to work with. I think we could see that change in the future if the ballpark that they have been working years on to get built in Oakland, if that pans out and they do end up getting more fans in town, they do end up getting more revenue, we could see a change in that aspect. But I don't know, it's hard to envision. But yeah, they really let a lot of guys go. They're back into that A's rebuild territory like we saw in the mid to early 2010s, where they really sucked. But in a few years from now, they'll have guys coming up from the minor leagues, just like Olson and Chapman did a few years ago, that will impact the team and make them competitive for just a few years. But it's one of those cycles where they're just like good for 4 years, bad for 4 years. They're not like they're not like the Braves. They're not like the Yankees and the Dodgers, teams that can just continually buy and trade for all-stars and stuff to keep their team good for a decade at a time. So yeah, it's really disappointing to see all these guys go, but it's always inevitable, and you always feel it coming as an A's fan.
Yeah, and it's frustrating to see from a neutral fan perspective. I mean, you have a team that's young, exciting, and successful, and they made the playoffs. Even though they didn't make good runs in the playoffs, I mean, they made the playoffs, and they had all these guys that are really fun to watch: Matt Chapman, Matt Olson, and they just kind of are content to throw it away, and it's frustrating every time. And I know everyone talks about parity in baseball, and the A's are often brought up as an example, but it's not that they really can't spend, it's that they won't spend. And they could. I mean, every team in Major League Baseball could. Even if they could only keep one of them, they probably should have done well to keep one of them. And it's frustrating to see, teams just because other smaller market teams will compete. The Padres are considered a smaller market team, and they'll spend. The Blue Jays you could consider a smaller market team, even though Toronto's a gigantic market in Canada, but they're not like on the same level of like financial clout as like the Yankees. I mean, and they're now reaping the benefits of that the A's sowed, and it sucks to watch from a from a neutral's perspective. On the bright side, I mean, they signed former KBO MVP Eric Dames, owner of probably the most ridiculous season you'll ever see in KBO. I mean,
God, 40.
47 home runs and 40 stolen bases.
First baseman.
He had 216 WRC plus that year. But I mean, he's obviously not playing in the KBO. He's obviously just going to be a placeholder first baseman, or DH for the A's, and then they'll lose a million games, and then that's it. They'll maybe trade him at the deadline to somebody, but I don't know. It's frustrating. We talked about the Yankees a lot, and they're another loser. We've been dogging the Yankees for several podcasts because they will not make any moves, and I still don't think they made enough impact moves to push them anywhere closer to winning that division. In my mind, they sit as the fourth best team in that division. The Red Sox look better on paper than them, and they added Trevor Story. The Rays are the Rays, and they've been chronically underestimated, and they win 90 games for the last 4 years. The Blue Jays are an impending juggernaut is what it looks like. And now the Yankees, they still have a good team, but they didn't get any better. They didn't do anything to push themselves over the top. And it's just kind of like, well, what was that? They made some solid moves. I just don't think anything really pushes them to the level of those teams. And they signed Joely Rodriguez, Tim LeCastro, of Foolish Baseball fame, Anthony Rizzo. They lost Corey Kluber, not a big loss. Rougned Odor and Clint Frazier. Those aren't big losses. But they traded for Josh Donaldson, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, and Ben Rortvedt. They traded away Gary Sanchez, Gio Urshela, and Luke Voigt. And like I said, I don't really understand a lot of these moves for the most part. I mean, some of them I think they got better, and some of them I think they got worse or kind of stayed the same. What are your thoughts about the Yankees offseason before we kind of nail the coffin shut of dogging them before the season starts?
Yeah, they just didn't make enough impact moves. Like you think the Yankees being the powerhouse that they are, and considering their history of signing all the biggest free agents, that they would have gone ahead and signed one of these big shortstops during probably the craziest shortstop free agent class of all time. They had so many choices, and they obviously needed a shortstop. They seem to want a stopgap instead, an IKF who fills in at shortstop with his good defense. But there were guys like we mentioned, Correa was out there, Story was out there, Semien was out there, Corey Seager was out there, and they let all those guys go. And instead, their biggest addition is Josh Donaldson, who's like 36 years old. And I'm really high on Josh Donaldson, but I don't think he's the difference maker that they need. They also signed Anthony Rizzo, who's a really good bat, but he's falling off. He's getting older. And I'm not sure they needed any more infielders, like you said, they traded away Luke Voigt and Gio Urshela just to make room for these guys. And those guys are not that bad. Like, I'm not super high on Urshela, but he's been really solid. Luke Voigt just hasn't had the opportunities. We've seen what he can do in 2020, leading the majors in home runs, and to just trade him away for a guy that may never make the majors. I think it was Justin Lang they got. Sorry, Justin.
Yeah.
Got to work on your stuff, but he's a really young guy. He's more a few years away. So yeah, I don't really know like what their plan was heading into the offseason. Did they have a plan? Did they stray from the plan? Was this their plan? It just seemed like, hey, like we're going to see what happens. And then they saw what happened and we're like, oh shoot, we didn't do anything. And sort of had to trade for Josh Donaldson and those guys. And they looked like the winner of that trade until the team that they traded with went and signed Carlos Correa, the biggest free agent in all of baseball. Like, I don't know what the Yankees are doing. They have high expectations because they are one of these teams with a super high payroll, an aggressive front office, an aggressive owner, and a history of winning and signing big free agents, trading for big guys. And their biggest move was trading for a 35-year-old third baseman who I think is really solid, but he's well past his prime. And they gave up on Gary Sanchez maybe a little bit too early. We could see him break out in a new look place in Minnesota. But yeah, it's sort of I'm not a Yankees fan, so I don't really mind that the Yankees didn't do anything, but I can imagine from a Yankees fan perspective. And I also don't have to imagine because I see all their tweets on Twitter of just like how disappointed, how upset they are about their team just not making a big move. And it's like they won 90 plus games last year, but if you're going to keep up with the Red Sox and the Rays and the Blue Jays, like you were saying, you're going to have to make a couple big moves, a couple bigger moves than they did. And they barely added to the rotation that seems like it's the weakest link of the team. They just were like, okay, we'll just add a couple more beef boys in Rizzo and Donaldson to mash some dingers. But yeah, they're just going to be riding Garrett Cole. Everybody jump on Garrett Cole's back because he's going to be pulling the whole rotation by himself. Like Jormont is pretty good. Jordan Montgomery, Severino's coming back from excuse me. Severino's coming back from Tommy John surgery. And yeah, they don't seem to have the rotation that's going to carry them, especially in one of the toughest, probably the toughest division in all of baseball. And they just didn't make the big move or even big multiple moves to make them a favorite in that category where they have always been a favorite to be a World Series contender. And I just don't see that this year anymore.
Right. I totally agree with you. And like from the moves standpoint too, I mean, they signed Isaiah, or they traded for Isaiah Kiner-Falefa too to be a stopgap shortstop. But like, I don't really understand the timeline of like what their plan is. Because I mean, they still have to extend Aaron Judge, and they should, and I'm assuming they're going to. If they don't, if they fail to, Brian Cashman should be unemployed immediately after the fact. But like, I don't understand the timeline because they're towing the line, but it's like they're content to be like a playoff team, and that's it. They traded for a 36-year-old Josh Donaldson who was injured last year, but he's been injured like 4 of the last 5 years at some point.
Yeah. They haven't won a World Series since 2009. It's like World Series or bust for them. They should have gone all out.
Right. They totally should. I mean, they have Joey Gallo in his last few years of arbitration. I think he's scheduled to be a free agent next year. They're still saddled with Giancarlo Stanton's contract, and he's getting older. Aaron Judge is 29 and is just now due to hit free agency. And I think his skill set ages well, but I mean, he's still going to be an older star. What's the plan? I mean, their next crop outside of Volpe and Peraza, I mean, I don't really even think is all that good. I mean, it's like Volpe, Peraza, Dominguez, and then everybody else is like off a cliff. And they're not bad prospects. They're not needle movers like those guys. So, I mean, are they going to bide their time and try to compete with Anthony Volpe, Peraza, and Dominguez when the rest of their core is, 33 years old or older, like Judge or Gallo, or Stanton's even older than that? I just don't really get it. I mean, their rotation isn't that good. And they have a couple decent pieces in the bullpen. I mean, but they're expecting a lot from their last couple of rotation spots, like Deivi Garcia and some random other guys. Like, I just don't.
Luis Hill.
Yeah, Luis Hill. I don't really get the move. The timeline doesn't make much sense if they're gonna go all out. Because I mean, making the Donaldson move now too, they could have pushed for Correa, and then they can just try to slide Correa to third after they call it Volpe. And then if they still want to have Peraza, they'd have Peraza, or they could trade Gleyber Torres, who's at second, play Peraza at second. Or they could trade Peraza for a big name starting pitcher and really try to go all out to win a championship. I'm not a Yankees fan, but I mean, every baseball fan knows that the Yankees are expected to be World Series or bust. If they don't win the World Series, or if they're not right at the precipice, I mean, that was a failure of a season for them. And it seems like to me, like they're content to just be a playoff team, and that's it. So I don't really understand the moves they made. I just don't think they make all that much sense. I mean, they made good moves. None of them moved the needle enough for me to be like, oh yeah, the Yankees are World Series contenders. I don't even think they'll win the division. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. Even with an expanded one right now, I mean, they don't look that good. The Mariners are better. Like, teams in the AL are a lot better and are going to fight them for those spots. Yeah. I just don't particularly. I don't know. I'm out on the Yankees for this season. Yeah, they might prove me wrong and shut me up, and I don't hope they do, and I never hope they do. But they very well could, and I could look dumb. I like a couple of guys on their roster. I mean, Aaron Judge is obviously a stud. Garrett Cole's amazing. I love Joey Gallo. I'm a huge Joey Gallo guy. But I don't know. It was a weird offseason, and like you said, I mean, it's like, did they forget to do anything until like it was too late and they fall asleep at the wheel? Like, what happened? Another team that honestly felt the same way until the last week when they seemingly made kind of a weird panic move. The San Diego Padres, we had pegged as another loser, and they signed Nick Martinez, Robert Suarez, and Luis Garcia. They lost their closer, Mark Melancon. They lost Vince Velasquez. Tommy Pham and Matt Strahm. They traded for Jorge Alfaro, traded for Luke Voigt, and they believe Matt Beattie was traded for, not claimed. He was DFA'd. Excuse me. They traded away Adam Frazier, who I believe they traded for in the middle of last season, and then they just traded him away right after the season, which was really weird. I just don't understand what Preller was doing. And this offseason looks like he was trying to cut costs, but still make their team better, and just kind of fell flat on his face.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think their offseason was weird. And they still are trying to get better, from what I've heard. I mean, they want to get rid of Hosmer. They want to get rid of Myers' contracts, but to do that, they're going to have to most likely pair them with a prospect and trade them away to someone that can eat the salary if they're going to. And that would just deplete their more further depleted farm system. I don't know. This was a weird offseason and a weird season in general for the Padres.
Yeah.
And it's kind of left me not as high on them as contenders. What are your thoughts about them?
Yeah, they sort of had just like a weird offseason, like you were saying. After last year's collapse in the towards the end of the season, like you would expect the Padres to go out there and make a couple big moves, especially like we saw, I think, in the 2020 deadline, and then in the offseason prior to 2021. Preller and the Padres were just big movers. They were signing all the starting pitchers, trading for Darvish and Clevenger and Snell and all those guys, and they were absolutely going crazy and just getting everybody and looking like they were going to be the next powerhouse in the NL West. And then last year, sort of everything started falling off towards the end of the season, and they didn't even make the playoffs, which is crazy because I know so many people were predicting them to be World Series favorites and stuff after they made the best rotation in baseball, and then have Tatis and Machado out there leading an offense that was really solid. But now this offseason, everything seems to have sort of flipped the script. Like you sign Nick Martinez from I think he was playing in either Japan or in Korea. He was playing overseas, and he was really solid wherever he was playing. And same with Robert Suarez, who's going to contribute to the bullpen. But to have those be only like two major signings, that's sort of weird, especially after how crazy they were going before. And I think that the biggest thing to remember is that Tatis is now going to miss the first 2 to 3 months of the season, which is a huge blow to a team that sort of doesn't have a lot of depth in the lineup. You know, they're relying on Nomar Mazara and Jurickson Profar to play in the outfield next year, who are pretty below average guys. And Mazara has switched around teams, and Profar has sort of never reached that ceiling that he had when he was the number one prospect. But yeah, they don't really have a lot of guys to contribute to that lineup, with Will Myers getting older and Hosmer, who's really not that great on the offensive side. And now with Tatis out for half the season, like you're going to be relying on guys that haven't really been stars so far across the season. Like you're going to be relying big time on Jake Cronenworth and Trent Grisham and stuff. But yeah, and then you also have to count on their rotation to return to the form that it had before. Like Snell really struggled in the first half of last season before turning it on, but that was a big trade acquisition. Clevenger almost immediately got Tommy John surgery and will be returning this year. Darvish fell off after the sticky substance ban, and then they have a couple other guys that are sort of mediocre or are sort of unknowns, like Nick Martinez. But yeah, it's sort of weird that like after they went crazy and signed and traded for a bunch of big guys, that they wouldn't double down, especially after the team struggled last season. You would think, hey, like, you know, we're so close. Like we've got such an amazing team. If we just make a couple more big moves, like just finish it off right here this offseason, we could be the favorites in all of baseball. Like if they just signed like another big bat or traded for another big starting pitcher like they've done previously, they could have really been favorites. But now it's sort of looking like, hey, like what are they doing? Why are they backing off after going so crazy the last couple of years in acquiring players? Why are they now backing off from what they were doing? Like their biggest acquisition is Luke Voigt, and that's a guy who has big power, but he's also like a health question mark. He's never played a full season. I think his most game played is something like 115, 120 or something, and that was back in I think 2019, 2018, and he wasn't at the level that he was playing at in 2020. So it's sort of hard to expect what you're going to get out of Luke Voigt. And then they really didn't make any other big moves. So it's sort of weird to like see them, like I said, to see them go crazy for two off seasons and a trade deadline, and then to see them sort of back off it like we sort of oversold ourselves, when it's like, no, you didn't. You just sort of struggled down the stretch last year, and you guys are like this close to being one of the premier teams in all of baseball. You just need to make a couple more moves. And it seems like either the owner was spooked off by how the team performed at the end of last season, or Preller was like, dang, I don't want to pull the same thing like I did just a few years prior when he
2015.
when he signed Upton and Kimbrel and all those guys, both Uptons and I think Matt Kemp too, and things didn't pay off well at all. So I don't know if he just got spooked again or what, but I really would have expected them to double down and go crazy, but they were one of the smallest movers this offseason, which is really confusing considering how their season ended last year.
Yeah, I had been thinking about that while you're talking about it, and it's almost like they did kind of get scared off at a repeat of 2015 when they did trade for Kimbrel and all these other guys and kind of fall flat. And it's like, oh well, we made all these moves and we depleted our farm system and we didn't really make the playoffs. When it's not like they just imploded like those Padres did. It's just, well, you struggled with injuries and you struggled with inconsistency. It's just you didn't quite get there in the end. The Giants were a surprise in the division too. I mean, like, at the time, they're not now, obviously, but I don't know. The moves were weird. They haven't really gotten any better. I mean, the rotation still has question marks. I mean, Joe Musgrove was good last year. But
I forgot about him.
What happened to Chris Paddock?
Exactly.
I mean, what happened to Chris Paddock? What happened to the rest of their bullpen? And now their bullpen was very bad. Tatis is hurt, and the rest of their lineup just doesn't really have those guys. I mean, MLB.com has them projected to call it like CJ Abrams and like Robert Hassel, but I don't think that's going to happen. At least not to start the season. They might call it Abrams.
Definitely not Hassel. Abrams could be the big replacement for Tatis, but he's like 21.
Yeah, right. So you're going to have growing pains with him most likely. I don't know. They're another team kind of like the Yankees where it's like, well, you seem like you're so close, and they seemed even closer than the Yankees. Tatis is the most exciting player in baseball, not named Shohei Ohtani. I mean, you kind of have to go for it now. And then they're just, well, they kind of balked at the opportunity. And now they're left with slim pickings if they're going to try to improve their lineup at all. I mean, they have Michael Conforto and no other big names. And yeah, I mean, especially with all the names too that were linked to them. Like, I mean, you would have thought they would have came away with someone like a Nick Castellanos, like a Nelson Cruz. And
exactly.
If that's what it took. I mean, if Nelson Cruz wouldn't have cost them anything. If they were really going to get,
they got no one.
Right. If they were really going to get like Nick Castellanos or something, they probably would have had to shed some salary and got rid of Will Myers somehow. But I mean,
which would have improved the team.
It would have improved the team. Like, if they're so dead set on holding on to all these prospects, I don't know what to tell them. I mean, they could have got rid of someone. It wouldn't have even needed to be like a top 5 guy. If they don't want to move Hassel, if they don't want to move Gore, if they don't want to move Abrams, and I understand that, if they don't want to move Camposano, like, why would you balk at the opportunity to get rid of the rest of your farm system, which is kind of like the Yankees and outside the top few guys is kind of middling or worse than middling? Just take some prospects that are flyer guys and trade Hosmer to like a team that can afford to take his contract, like the Cubs could have, or like, maybe not the Reds, but like the Pirates could have. You could ship one of those guys off and attach a decent prospect to them, and they would have freed up the space for it. And then they were just like, nah, we're going to stay in pat with, a platoon of Luke Voit and Eric Hosmer at first base. Because that's what they said they're going to do. They're going to platoon them. And that's dumb, because Eric Hosmer should not be getting major league at bats if you can afford not to do that, especially for a team that's trying to win, a championship. I just don't, this move doesn't, like, the lack of moves makes no sense. It's not like they made no signings. They didn't re-sign Tommy Pham. If they really wanted to platoon anybody, they could have had him for dirt cheap in the outfield, and he's better than like nothing. He's better than a shell of Will Myers. I don't get the moves that they failed to make. They didn't do anything. I mean, they signed Matt Beattie. He doesn't really move the needle. Jorge Alfaro has kind of failed to live up to potential, and Luke Voit has potential, but he's probably the best get that they had. And that's, I don't know. I mean, when you're like, oh, a World Series contender, like, who's your big at? Like, Luke Voit. Like, no, it isn't. Like, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know. I'm not really feeling the Padres this year. I mean, the Giants got so much better. The Dodgers obviously got so much better than them. They're the third best team in their division, and the other two are or bottom feeders, punching each other in the corner. But I don't know. I'm not sold on the Padres as contenders because they failed to do anything.
Mhm.
We have one more loser if you want to talk about it. If not, that's okay.
Winner.
Winner. Excuse me. That's right. We should have time. Let's go over one more winner. Yeah, tacked on to get rid of all this negativity of the losers. One more winner we had was the Seattle Mariners. They obviously signed AL Cy Young winner Robbie Ray. They lost to free agency Yusei Kikuchi, James Paxton, Tyler Anderson, and Sean Doolittle, but they traded for Adam Frazier from the aforementioned San Diego Padres, and from the Cincinnati Reds, they got Jesse Winker and Eugenio Suarez. Their only losses being Jake Fraley and Brandon Williamson, really, in those trades. I think their moves were really good. Obviously makes a young team that's on the doorstep of contending. Just missed the playoffs last year with Winker, Suarez, Robbie Ray. Makes them a lot better. What are your thoughts on the Mariners?
I included them as a bonus team because I wasn't completely sold that they were one of the top 4 winners of the offseason, but I thought they were right on the precipice there. Signing Robbie Ray is huge, especially to a rotation that was sort of lacking that clear ace. I think they were relying on like Marco Gonzalez as their ace last year, but with Logan Gilbert and Chris Flexen and other guys out there, Logan Gilbert could take a step forward, and to add Robbie Ray to just anchor that rotation at the top is going to be huge. Will make that rotation really solid. And they didn't really lose too many guys. Obviously, Paxton didn't pitch for them last year. Kikuchi was an all-star, but fell off in the second half. Tyler Anderson was a trade acquisition from the Pirates, and Sean Doolittle was also a trade acquisition from the Reds. And then to get guys like Frazier and Winker and Suarez to add to a lineup that sort of needed some punch. That's some punch. Frazier's not a big power guy, but he can provide some really good batting average. He's a really good contact guy, can play second base and the outfield. Winker is one of those guys. I think he's a premier offensive threat in the MLB, and I think he's really underrated. And Suarez is, of course, somebody who needs to bounce back, but if he does bounce back, he could hit 40+ bombs. We've seen it before. So yeah, they really added to their offense that really needed it. They signed that ace that they really needed. They didn't lose really any key pieces from last season. And they barely missed the playoffs last year. I think they were the first team that was on the outside looking in. They had the best record for a team that didn't make the playoffs. So to add the AL Cy Young Award winner, to add an all-star in Winker and a former all-star in Suarez, and Adam Frazier as one of those, not even a depth guy, just a guy that can play all over and do sort of everything that you need. Really interesting offseason. Not sure it's going to push them over the top, but it's going to make them really competitive. The AL West, I think, is a division that can be won now, with the A's dropping off and the Astros losing Correa, not really replacing anybody there. I think the Astros could be even considered one of the losers of the offseason. I know I didn't put them in there, and we don't have them on the rundown, but they didn't add anybody. They lost Correa. So I think now is the time for the Mariners to jump at the division and go for broke, and try to break that curse of just not making the playoffs since 2001. And they made all the right moves, it seems like, and they they have the prospects to add a couple guys at the deadline, whether that be calling people up or trading people. You could see Julio Rodriguez up. Jared Kelenic could take a huge step forward next year, as he was the number 1 prospect last year, heading into the season. So yeah, the Mariners have a lot to like about their offseason, and they could be the AL West champions by the end of the season when all is said and done, because of the moves that they made. But yeah, I don't know. I think if they had made one more big addition, or even a couple more smaller ones, I would have been more sold that they were a clear winner. But the 4 teams that we had already previously mentioned sort of beat them out, just by a little bit. Especially the Giants was very close. Davis and I were debating that one for a little bit. But the Mariners are a really good team. They added the right type of guys that they needed to make them clear contenders in the AL West.
Does it push them up any more in your mind if Julio Rodriguez makes the opening day roster? Like, for me, I think it would. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, but I think that makes the Mariners roster one a little bit more marketable. You have your top prospect up. If he wins an award,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get the reward there, or he gets the year of service time, but you generate goodwill with him. I don't know. I really like I like the Mariners moves, not so much as much as the Giants, but I think if J-Rod comes up, I have to move them up a little bit in my mind. Maybe not quite to the Giants, but like maybe like a 4.5 for the winners instead of 5. What are your thoughts? Does that push them up in your mind if they do get that call up for J-Rod?
I think it definitely pushes them up, but I'm not sure it pushes them over the top. J-Rod hasn't played above AA. You rarely see players come up that haven't played above AA, let alone hit the ground running. But it's important to note that J-Rod is one of the top prospects in all of baseball. He's a special talent. He's like the next Ronald Acuna, Juan Soto guy that comes up and just hits the ground running and is a star immediately right away. So I could see that happening, but he's really young. He's probably still got a lot to work on. I don't see him coming up right away, even if it does make a difference, but I don't think he's going to be coming up later than late May. I think he's going to be coming up and we're going to see a few months of him and he's going to make at least a bit of a difference. Hopefully he doesn't fall flat on his face, sort of like Kelnick did last year, but I think he's more of a special talent than Kelnick, and he's could really make that lineup just incredible if he does get called up and does hit the ground running.
I agree, and I know there's been reports of him working in center field specifically, and I think he has a chance to make the opening day roster as like to play center field. He might not stay up if he struggles. I think they'd probably be pretty quick to hook him. But I don't know. I like the Mariners offseason. Maybe number 5. Not quite as good as the Giants. We'll move on really quick to our free agent predictions review. If you guys have not read it, you should. Just go to theathleteshub.org and read our free agency predictions article. Right before the lockout ended, actually, we predicted where all of the big name free agents, according to MLB trade rumors, would land. Why don't you go ahead and start talking about the scoring system and then the results of what happened?
Yeah, you said we predicted, but I think you were the one who was making the most predicting because you blew me out of the water, wiped me away in this sort of makeshift competition. But I sort of made a little scoring system to help us sort of track to see who won. We only predicted the top 10 free agents, so there wasn't a ton to go over, but I gave us a 10 points. Nobody ever got the 10 points, the perfect score for getting the team correct, the correct contract length, and the exact contract value. But we did have a couple 7-pointers, which was getting the team correct and the correct length of the contract and within $5 million of the contract value. And then other than that, you would get 2 points for guessing the correct team, 2 points for guessing the correct contract value, 2 points for guessing the correct yearly value, and 2 points for guessing the correct length of the contract. Unless you had the same guess as the other person, then it was a wash, no points for either person. And then for those leftover points, you would get one point for getting closer to the actual contract value than the competitor, which was me versus Davis. So yeah, we had that first one. You won basically all of them. The total points came out to me with 15, and with more than double as many points as me, Davis had freaking 33. So I got roasted. I really thought I had some good predictions, but as it turns out, I don't know baseball free agency as well as I thought I did.
Yeah, a couple of the ones that were like really frustrating was the Carlos Correa one. Obviously, we both had him pegged. We had him both pegged for the Cubs. Wearing the hats today. Didn't happen. He played for the Twins. I predicted he'd actually get about $35 million a year, and he signed for 35.1, which is very annoying because I was very close to that one.
Yeah, you got 2 points for that one.
Yeah, still, I was so close, so close.
Yeah.
A couple weird ones. One of the ones that I thought was really funny was for Nick Castellanos. I predicted the right team, and Jake predicted the right contract. So
exactly right.
Yeah, exactly right. So we were so close, just so close. Obviously signed for the Philadelphia Phillies for 5 years, $100 million, which comes out to $20 million a year. There were a few surprises. Obviously, I mean, Chris Bryant. We were way off on that one. Obviously, we were way off on the Freddie Freeman one. I think everyone on Earth was. Trevor Story, neither of us were really close in terms of destination. I got the contract right. Humble brag.
Mm-hmm.
But that was almost like a shot in the dark. A lot of mine were just like, oh, this sounds good. We had a few that were pretty close. I think we did pretty good overall. Free agency just ended up being a lot weirder than I think we both anticipated. I think it
Yeah.
seemed like there was a lot of things kind of like almost set in stone, like the Yankees were going to try to make a move for someone. I don't think either of us at all probably predicted Trevor Story to go to the Red Sox. No one on earth predicted Chris Bryant to sign with the Rockies. That was so weird.
Yeah.
It was just it was a weird free agency, so it's hard to get right. Obviously, these things are all, up to the people that get the contracts and pay them in. So, it's
You
always
nailed a
up to
couple
them.
of them, though. You nailed a couple of them. The Rizzo and the Kershaw signing. Davis was literally so close. He Rizzo signed with the Yankees for 2 years, $32 million. Davis had him signing with the Yankees for 2 years, $35 million. That was a 7-pointer right there. And he backed that up with Kershaw, who signed with the Dodgers for 1 year, $17 million. Davis had him going to the Dodgers for 1 year, $18 million. So that was another 7-pointer. So yeah, that's how you blew me out of the water. With just those two, you were 1 point away from tying me. So it really didn't take much to destroy me after that. But yeah, that was pretty impressive. You had some really good predictions.
You had the Castellanos one that was so close, and then you had you predicted the right destination for Kyle Schwarber, the right length, and off a little bit on the contract. But I think Kyle Schwarber signed for a lot more than pretty much everyone thought.
Yeah.
He signed for what? I think it was 4 years, $79 million.
Yeah.
And Jake had him for 4 years, $65 million, which would have came out to $16.3 million a year. I had him on a shorter deal back to Boston on a higher AAV, which was not even close. So we had a bunch of weird ones that we didn't really predict happening. A lot of guys signed for less, and a lot of guys signed for more, which is weird. Seiya Suzuki signed for a lot more than I think either of us, including we took a lot of projections, or at least I did. I kind of based them off MLB Trade Rumors projections for the contracts they'd get, and similar guys of the same stature. But Seiya Suzuki signed for a lot more than we thought. I think I had the higher of the two guesses, and it was $60 million. He signed for $85 million, which was a pretty big
That's a
shocker.
record for somebody coming from Japan.
Yeah. It was an overall weird free agency, tough to predict. But maybe next time, maybe next year,
it was fun.
We'll do this again. Maybe
it was fun.
Maybe I'll get 2 points and Jake will get all of them. It was fun. It was a fun time. And on that note, I think it is an excellent time to bring in the closer. Who's our closer for the day that you're calling out of the bullpen, Jake?
Time to make the call to the bullpen. Since we've got free baseball right now, overtime extra inning podcast. We're bringing in Tom Henke, the great Tom Henke, to close down the podcast. He had a 14-year career from 1982 to 1995, where he pitched for the Rangers, most notably for the Blue Jays, went back to the Rangers for a couple of years, and then finished off his incredible career with the Cardinals. He was an imposing pitcher. He was 6'5" frame, big guy. He had a big fastball, a hard fastball, and a nasty forkball, which is similar to a splitter. So yeah, he was going in there and just blowing you away with a fastball and then getting you way out in front with a nasty forkball. And that gave him the nickname the Terminator, because he wore some nice goggles, some nice glasses, that sort of made him look like the Terminator with those just like terminating your lineup. He was going to come in and terminate the game, and that's what he's doing right here for us. He was drafted in 1979 by the Cubs. He forewent that, and was then drafted again in January of 1980 by the Mariners, and then forewent that one to be drafted in the 4th round of the June draft in 1980 by the Rangers. His career didn't start off too well with the Rangers. He had some success in small sample sizes for his first 2 years of his career in 1982 and 1983 with the Rangers. But then in 1984, he struggled like big time, like an ERA over 6. And I think that led to him being released or DFA'd. I'm not really sure how contracts worked in the mid 80s, but I'm sure it's not really similar to how it works now. So the Blue Jays scooped him up, and he made his debut with Toronto the next year in 85, and he was amazing at a 2.03 ERA with 13 saves in 28 games, and somehow still had rookie eligibility because of how small his sample sizes were for the first 3 years with Texas. So he ended up finishing 7th in AL Rookie of the Year voting and 20th in AL MVP voting, excuse me. So that was just like a wonderful start to his career in Toronto, and he just took off from there. In 1987, he made his first All-Star team with a 2.49 ERA, an AL leading 34 saves, and an MLB leading 62 games finish that led to a 13th place finish in AL MVP voting. Pretty impressive for a closer. He was obviously one of the elite closers in the mid to late 80s. And from 1986 to 1993, he saved 20 or more games in each of those seasons. He had a career high 40 in 1993, which didn't lead the league, but was really impressive. And he retired after recording 36 saves and a 1.82 ERA with the Cardinals in 1995, which is pretty crazy. You know, like maybe he still had a little left in the tank, could have still kept going, but he said, you know what, I want to retire on a high note, sort of David Ortiz style, going out on top. He was an all-star that year. He finished 22nd in NL MVP voting. And that led his career to, he finished his career with a 22.9 baseball reference WAR in 789 and 2/3 innings pitched, with 861 strikeouts. His 311 career saves are 25th all time. Very solid. And that came with a 2.67 ERA and a 1.09 WHIP. So he was one of the most dominant closers of all time. I think he's really underrated. You can go play with him on MLB The Show. Imposing threat, and the Terminator is here to come terminate this podcast and send us all home happy.
That's right. Catch our next show on Monday. We did this one a little late this week. You can catch us again next Monday at 4:00. We are going to somehow, at some point, change our background. We're doing Mondays at 4, not 5. Make sure you read Jake's first base preview article at athleteshub.org. And that's it. We'll see you next time.